All right, I think we're going to get started with the folks that are here. I want to say welcome to everyone. I'm Emily Zilber. I'm the Director of Curatorial Affairs and Strategic Partnerships for the Esherick Museum. I'm really excited to have you here today with us for our conversation with Peter Park, who I'll introduce in a moment. I first just want to say thank you for gathering with us today. Um, After a day like we had yesterday, it's really wonderful to be in community with all of you and to focus on inspiration, creativity, and the other sort of magical things that are so exciting that we find in art and creative action. So thank you for being here with us. Um, I just want to do a little housekeeping. We hope that you'll join us again on January 26th for our second in a new series of 20-minute spotlight talks. We'll be focusing on Henry Varnum Poor's portrait plates of the Esherick family. You can RSVP for that on our website, and Katie, I believe, is dropping the link to that in the chat. Today's talk with Peter came as a result of our Creatives on Esherick series. This is an ongoing social media and virtual programming series that highlights contemporary artists, makers, and scholars inspired by Esherick's work. So if you haven't seen the other ones that we've done, please check them out. You can find all the posts on Instagram under the hashtag Creatives on Esherick. So I want to introduce Peter to you. Peter Park's artistic work centers around functional objects, furniture, musical instruments, and sculpture. In his artist statement, he writes, and I'm quoting him here, "The beauty of the human body and characteristic forms of various living creatures always inspire me. It naturally leads me to take an interest in organic shapes and to create anthropomorphic forms. I love to explore innovative ways of creating objects based on this motif in various formats. I also explore the sensory experience and sculptural qualities derived from a functional object made out of wood." Peter was born in Columbus, Ohio, and he grew up in South Korea. He holds a BFA in painting from Kookmin University and an MFA in woodworking and furniture design from the Rochester Institute of Technology. Peter won the 2015 Warden Esherick Museum Excellence in Wood Award at the Philadelphia Museum of Art Craft Show. So we have certainly loved his work for quite some time. He served as a Wingate resident artist at Indiana University of Pennsylvania, currently teaches woodworking and furniture making at the University of the Arts, and has taught workshops at craft schools, including Haystack, Penland, Aramont, Peters Valley, and the Center for Furniture Craftsmanship. So today's program, we're going to have about 25 to 30 minutes of conversation with Peter, and then I'll leave about 10 to 15 minutes at the end for questions. Those you can either put in the chat box or, if it's working, if there's not so many questions that we're all on top of each other, you can unmute your video and ask those questions directly. And I think that's all the housekeeping. Without further ado, let's chat with Peter. So hi, Peter. Do you want to say hello to everyone?
Hi, I'm Peter. Nice to meet you.
And tell us where you are today.
I'm in my studio. I've been busy working in the studio, and I'm currently studio, which is in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania.
Great. I wonder if we can begin by just chatting about when and how you first encountered Esherick's work.
The first time I saw Esherick's works was when I was in grad school up in Rochester, and we went on a field trip to a private residence, and in the house there was one of Esherick's spiral staircase was installed, and we went on and to see the spiral staircase, and at first it was a little odd for me because it was just a spiral staircase with no interior surroundings. Apparently, the from the point when the staircase was installed in the house, it was renovated. So everything was gone and it was just an empty space with the staircase preserved. So at first I didn't even realize it was a staircase, but and then it kind of took me a second to like, oh, I see the stairs now. So um, but that was the first time I saw Esherick's works, and then it was really inspiring though, because and I was able to focus on the sculptural quality of it rather than the functional of it. And then later on, when I went to Esherick's museum, um, and I saw the staircase that is installed in the space, then it
And
was more
I'm
like,
gonna share the screen so we can have that image. So let's
yeah.
you can keep chatting, but there'll be soon be an image on your screen.
But yeah, so once I saw the spiral staircase that was installed in the Esherick's museum with the handrails and the second floor and the first floor, it made more sense. And also along with Esherick's sculptural pieces, and which make more sense.
Yeah, it's a different experience to see something like the staircase in context rather than taken out of context, sort of as a piece that doesn't have this kind of real architectural surroundings. It's sort of treated a little differently.
Right, yeah.
So, I know that in your Creatives on Esherick post, which I encourage folks to go back and take a look at after the talk today if they haven't seen it, I was really interested in your focus on the idea that a trace of a tool seems visible in Esherick's finished pieces. And I'm curious if you can share a little bit more about how that idea, how you see it manifesting in Esherick's work and how it's influenced your own work, how it appears in your own work.
I think first, and this was sort of towards like the earlier um, beginning of my woodworking career, that, and especially in the beginning when I was starting out, I was just mostly very interested in smooth surface, like smoothly sanded surface, that it's not high gloss, like which it like lacquer sprayed surfaces, but more like steel wooled, very satin hand sanded surface, which I thought it was really beautiful and have like human quality to it. And when I saw Esherick's pieces, it was all over, like all sanded, very elaborately, very diligently sanded, and I was very inspired by that. And I try to make all my work nice and smooth and pleasant to touch. But then later, um, I spent more time doing woodworking, and I realized that seeing, when you use a certain tool, you on top of the tool leaving tool marks on the surface, it also kind of the tool that you're using influence or directs the form of the shape that you're doing with the wood. And I was more sort of inspired by that direction, and I could see it a lot in Esherick's sculptural pieces. If you look at the horse sculptures of Esherick's pieces, I see that he used like hand rasps and um, files, and that it's like a straight reference, abrasive tools that gives you that kind of like very beautiful, subtle line, but it gives you also a rich edges, which I think it's really beautiful. So that's when I started intentionally create those forms, and then that continued on for me to inspire to leave textures on the surface, if that makes sense in case by cases. So Yeah, so yeah, it was a huge influence to see Esherick's work and his forms, and understanding that, oh, these tools kind of result in those forms, and that was very interesting.
Yeah, I love thinking about these two works together. Your piggyback chair from 2013 and Cheater shown here in the studio. There's so many things that connect them, whether it is in terms of form, in terms of the sensitivity to the handling of the material and the surface. Anything else that you might want to say about that connection?
Um, well, I also like that, the playfulness of it, and the the inspiration that Esherick took, which is a lot of animals, and uh, the gestures of the animals also sometimes very humorous. And I like that about that. I think it presents character, um, it adds character to the object, and I tried to contain that in my work as well.
Yeah, absolutely. We've been really lucky enough to host you at the studio many times, and I'm curious if you talked a little bit about the difference between seeing Esherick's staircase in the context of the studio and in this kind of more domestic or white walled gallery context. I'm curious if how to ask how seeing Esherick's work in context has made an impact on your understanding of him or your understanding of yourself as an artist?
I think, the once I saw Esherick's work, and both from that field trip and then also in the museum, um, and you go back to your house or your and what you do to do a more deep dive into the artist is to look up images or pictures in an artist book. So you go to a library, pick up a book, and flip through his work. And what you mostly see is individual pieces that are professionally taken with studio photo shots, and that was inspiring. And there were a lot of furniture pieces that were commented very often. But as much as I liked Esherick's furniture pieces, I also really loved seeing sculptural pieces, like, and also the fact that he used to paint, and he used to mainly create sculptures. And me coming from not coming from a woodworking background, or a designer background, me coming from a fine art background, and but making the transition to try to become a furniture designer, sometimes I would try to compartmentalize those two different aspects of it, like the artistic parts of the creating work, and thinking about the practical functionality of the object. And so, once I do that, I try to separate those two. But seeing Esherick's work and seeing how well he blended those two elements together would encourage me to go back and mush those two together, and be more um, encouraged by um, still carry on those artistic values that I thought it was important in my work, when I was starting to when I had in my um, pocket, from my artistic training years.
Yeah, no, there didn't have to be this kind of hard and fast boundary between the way
Hmm.
that you thought as a painter and the way that you were going to be thinking as a furniture maker as you made that transition.
I think seeing Esherick's work is always a reminder that you know don't you don't need to like get away and try to separate those two. You're totally fine to try to mix them together and
Mhm.
challenge it, do challenges to make things happen.
Absolutely. No, I think that's a really interesting point of connection between you two. I was also really, interested about some of the spaces and vignettes in the studio that you spoke about as being particularly meaningful to you. I know that you've mentioned drawing inspiration both from the spiral staircase, but also the dining room floor, where Esherick's interest in sort of problem solving through materials and utilizing every piece of wood, no matter what shape or form, to his advantage is really on full display. And I'm curious if you can talk a little bit about what attracts you to that approach, or what really intrigued you about the floor in the dining room.
I think, excuse me. I think, uh, I think it was not the first time I saw the dining room floor. I think it was at least like the second or the third time going to the Esherick Museum. And if you know Esherick's museum, every time you go to the museum, you find it something new, and and it was one of those things. And I think I was like, I had like a couple of years in my grad years, or maybe even after my grad years, and I went back to the museum, and when you're um, in tune with the technicality of the woodworking, you always think about straightening the edges of the raw lumber, um, and then start thinking about how to make things. But when I saw Esherick's floor, I could see what he was doing. He was basically just preserving the pre-shaped lumbers, or cut off lumber from a scrap from a other project, and then utilizing those shapes to fit them together to install the floor. And that kind of approach was so unusual, I guess academically unusual. um, and it was so inspiring that gave me the idea of, oh, maybe it's okay to use small little odd pieces to make something bigger. And that basically gave me the idea of a lot of these segmented carving techniques, or like even flat surface. I like inspired me to do a lot of patchwork that it's not right angles, and try to be more free with the angles. And so yeah, that was such a big lesson that I got from visiting the Esherick's Museum many times.
I mean, I think you can see that kind of fluidity in a work like your cocoon bench here, which was made in 2013, and local friends may know from the wonderful 2016 exhibition at the Center for Art and Wood here in Philadelphia, On the Edge of Your Seat, Chairs for the 21st Century. You may also have seen this in a solo show that Peter had at the Philadelphia International Airport. Although going to the airport to see an exhibition seems like a long time ago now. Um, I'm
Uh,
curious if you could talk a little bit more about the making of this work and why it's so important in your own personal artistic trajectory.
Yeah, so this piece was um, me trying to. So I started out um, these segmented carving technique inspired from Esherick's work, and I was trying to repeatedly utilize it to build up furniture pieces, or more so like rigid forms. And I was wondering how big I could get with this technique. And this was when I was testing pushing it and see how big I can get it. Um, and I was pretty happy how it came out. I was happy how I like succeeded my goal uh, scale um, that I targeted in the beginning. But also, it gave me a lot of problems to solve um, while making the piece, but also after the fact that I finished the piece, and it really pushed me to be really creative and innovative to solve those problems. And by going through that process, I felt like I learned so much and I grew so much um, that when I look at this piece, it's a love-hate relationship. It feels good that I accomplished this scale of work, but also at the same time it reminds me of all those problems that I had and I still have because of this piece, but also it's a reminder for um, those problems that I have to solve, and inspires me to always kind of challenge myself to be more um, innovative and creative in my work.
And I'm just
Um,
showing here some other images of that piece. I don't know if seeing these different vantage points prompts any additional thoughts.
um, one of the problems that, and this was after the fact that I finished the piece, and this was at the Center for Art and Wood for a while, and one other thing um, that I feel really important that it's really important is that the audience are able to touch the piece
Mhm.
and experience it rather than just looking at it from a distance. Um, so we let people sit on the bench and or the chair. Um, and one of the thing that we found out was that the seat being so smooth that it was actually counter functional. Everybody was sliding down, weren't able to sit up on the chair, and that's sort of when I realized, oh, maybe on the where people sit, it needs to be less smooth and more texture. Or, but that was like one of the things that I learned through the piece.
I have to tell you, it makes me think of the couch in Esherick's bedroom, which was, of course, returned to him from the
Mm.
box because people could not sit on it in a in a decorous manner. They kept sliding back. So I think we've discovered another moment of confluence just in the conversation here. And then just for folks who didn't have a chance to see it at the airport, the image of your solo exhibition there, where I really think you can see the sort of distinction between those hard lines of the case and those lovely sort of soft fluid lines of your work.
That,
It really highlights that juxtaposition.
that was another learning experience for me, exhibiting that piece at the airport. Is that I always thought that that piece was so big, but
Mhm.
then seeing it at the airport was thinking, oh, it's not that big.
It's not when the ceilings get to be that high, right?
Yeah, yeah.
That's definitely a shift. I mean, I think this notion of the slide makes me think very much of the sense of, intentional or not intentional. It makes me think very much of the sense of play and humor and fun that can be found in your work, which to my eyes, it's a great tie with Esherick. You and I were talking a little bit yesterday about the tools in the kitchen here that have this wonderful face on them, right? This sense of anthropomorphism and play and humor. It's hard to look at the face there and not have a little giggle to yourself. I see that anthropomorphic sensibility in a piece here, like Arnold, which is your collaboration with the metalsmith Nash Quinn. I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about the role of play in your work.
I role a play, but also I guess well, so when I think of objects, I often see it as a creature that it's alive, or a thing that has its own personality, and especially when an object has a function, so that it inter it provides interaction with human, and by going through the experience of having that interactions, kind of may give you the idea of developing a character or a personality between you two. And I always loved that about functional objects and also furniture. So I for both like existing objects, but also pieces that I'm working on, I often think as or relate to something that someone that I know, or something, an animal, or a certain animal. Like this was a case when, so I had a client who wanted me to make a credenza for her, but she wanted to be very personal. And I was thinking about what can be personal. And I remember the time when I went to my client's house for the first time and seeing her pet pig for the first time. and and the pig's name was Arnold. And I saw it was a house pig. It wasn't like a full size farm pig. It was like a small mini sized house pig that lives inside the living room. And I stepped in the living room and I saw the pig, and I was sort of stunned by it because I wasn't expecting to see a pig in a house. And later, my client introduced me to Arnold, and I said hi to Arnold. And I took that very like, remember, that was like such a memorable experience for me. And I think when I think of my client, I always think about meeting Arnold. So I took that as an inspiration and wanted to make the credenza as another version of an Arnold. So um, that's how the credenza became the name Arnold. And when I was designing Arnold, the credenza, I always try to sort of keep a good balance between not being too literal but not being too abstract. So if you imagine this piece without the snouts, you might not even know if this was inspired by a pig, but just having that snout, it's so clear. It makes it so clear that it's a pig reference. So I just like that kind of playfulness in the object, and also like kind of suggestive elements that are in appropriate places, so that it kind of gives you that it projects the character of the piece. I love that about the piece, and I try to repeatedly have that in my work.
I think that really comes through in the musical instruments that you make, not just the sense of fun and play and character, but you manage to connect it here and in Arnold with this real sense of tactility and engagement. And I'm curious if you can talk I want to make sure that we have time to get to everything, but if you can talk for a little bit about the role that instruments play in your practice.
Yeah, I love to play music, and I wanted to have my own guitar, but also make my own guitar for a very long time. And then once I became a woodworker, I started making one. And ever since I made my own, I've been making uh, continuously. And I tried to apply my love for having character in the object when I'm making guitars as well. But the guitar being such an object that has a specific function,
Mm-hmm.
and then also me, I love to play the guitar as well, and I've been playing a lot, that I um, know I when I make a guitar, I expect it to function well, I guess, so much that it I think that's what prevents me to compromise the shape, um, so that it looks more like a something rather than be more playable as a guitar. So for me, making a guitar is much more as like those difficult problems that it's constantly difficult, but it's enjoyable to try to go at it and solve it because it's difficult. Um,
Right. There's
so
so
yeah,
many things that need to be attended to in order for it
yeah,
to be the thing that you want it to be. So,
yeah,
keeping track of that, making sure that it's all happening at the same time to the same degree of quality that's a challenge.
yeah, yeah. It's an ongoing battle.
An ongoing battle. A battle is sounds more intense than a challenge, I think. I mean, I'm curious. I think we want to close today with a conversation about something that you're working on right now.
Mhm.
Physical contact and an individual's tactile experience of a work. That's also a really important part of what you do, as you've said. And I know that's true not just for your work as an artist, but also for your work as an educator. Um, I'm curious if you can talk a little bit about some of your ideas around tactility centered around a piece that you're in the middle of working on now. And this is great. We get to see some sketchbook, some sketchbook shots and some thoughts about new ideas.
Yeah, tactile experience is really important for me. On top of the the anthropomorphic quality of the objects that I make, and sometimes, or more often, um, the because I focus on that kind of aspect of me thinking that objects might be alive, or me constantly relating that to something that it's or someone or something that it's alive. I often get inspired by human body when I'm designing something, and all that also leads to just even the motion of human body being being the moving force of the direction of the form of the piece. um, and I've been doing been thinking about that a lot when the pandemic hit.
Hmm.
And since the pandemic, now that um, the thinking about touching someone became a fear rather than um, a pleasant uh, experience. And but then at the same time, because you're sort of prohibited by it, by doing it, you're more urged to, or you're more desired to touch something. um, so I had a thinking that maybe if I want to make an object that really emphasizes and focus on the touching the of the object, and try to think of like what could that be, and I thought of like Esherick's handrails around the spiral stairway that it's installed in in Esherick Museum, and I thought it was such a perfect example of like, because if you see the handrails, it just lies just perfectly where the hand goes when you are moving up through the staircase, and it just sort of, I thought it was like a representation of where your hand goes while you're in that motion, and I thought that was such a beautiful thing that I wanted to create something that it's related to that. So I'm right now planning on a piece that is basically an endless handrail that it gets installed in a space, and the structure would go along the walls continuously, and you as an audience, you come in to the show, and then you start riding your hand along the handrails, and then just walk along the walls, and then while your hands are riding along the handrails, and from start to beginning, that is the experience of the show. And I really felt strongly about making that happen. So that's what I'm working on right now.
And you were lucky, you were grateful, gracious enough to share with us some of these shots of the handrail components in process in your studio. And I think that idea of sort of piecing things together certainly is very clear.
It definitely add tons of more problems for me to solve. But which is it's a fun part for me.
I'm just going to go through just so we can get an idea of scale, and this is really a big undertaking. And do you have any idea when it might come to? Well, I suppose it all depends on the pandemic, but when it might come to fruition, or where.
Well, initially I was planning to have a show with this idea on 2021. Mm-hmm. So I'm not still late.
You are not late. No, 2021 is wide open before us.
Yeah, I still have time to make it happen. But if not, yeah, I would aim for the next year. If I don't get to finish a lot of the work. But yeah, very, very soon that I'm planning to do the show.
That's fantastic. Well, I want to make sure that we leave some time for folks who are here to ask questions. Thank you so much for sharing with us and sharing so graciously. I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and folks can either put questions in the chat, or unmute themselves and ask a question of Peter. I'm looking here. Are the marks on your works, this is from Eva Jane, are the marks on your only from your tools, or are they something natural in the wood itself?
I as far as I remember, I rarely leave or left something natural, like a natural edge or a natural surface from the raw lumber in my work. I think most of them are with hand tools and my tool marks.
Fantastic. And I see another Eva Jane also mentioned Arnold the pig from Green Acres. So I don't know if he was in your mind, but that's a nice a nice little moment of overlap.
It definitely came up in from the conversation with
Did it? Was Arnold the pig named after Arnold the TV pig?
That's what my client just immediately said that out loud, but I was saying, I know it's Arnold, your pig. But yeah, I learned that there was a TV show with a pig named Arnold.
That's
along the
funny.
Process.
I have a question. It's a little involved for writing, but I'm just kind of curious about your musical instruments, and you touched on it a bit, but how much do you think about material and sound? I know that, certain types of wood can make a big difference. And,
Hmm.
have you had much opportunity to experiment with that?
I did, especially in the beginning when I was trying to figure out how to make guitars and any kind of stringed instrument. And I was doing a lot of research on um, well-known tone woods that are used in guitar manufacturers and guitar like existing guitar makers. Um, and I learned that they are reasons why um, those tone woods are selected for um, their innate qualities, but also there's no real rule for for a certain material should not be a guitar. And I like that about that more than learning about what is a good tone wood. I like the fact that I could break the rules of what it's a good tone wood and what it's not. So I tried, like in the beginning, I guess try to use good tone woods so that I know that I can um, accomplish a good sounding guitar. But once I went through that like a couple of times, then I went on and tried to use um, materials that are not really well known for good sounding, like cardboard boxes or plywood, like just regular plywood, or just 2x4 milled thin and glued together, and try out how they sound. And some might say that, oh, that's not good sounding, but for me it's an interesting sound, and I think I take value on those as well. So I'm very open to utilizing different kind of materials as for guitars.
Great,
I
thank
think
you. That's interesting.
Thanks, Terry, for that great question. I think we have time for another question here from Trina. How did you get into woodworking? And she's curious about your art school experience before your MFA.
Um, Wait, what was the second part? Sorry.
So how did you get into woodworking? And
Hmm.
curious about your experience in art school, your BFA before your MFA.
Um, I so how I started woodworking was it is very related to my experience in art school, and I thought I wanted to be a big wall painting artist like Keith Haring or Banksy. uh, uh, or I was really inspired by like pop artists like Basquiat or Andy Warhol.
Mm.
So those are the thing. Those are what my experience inspiration when I was in college. But as I was studying painting, and it's an art. It was a fine art program that has very little like separation between like sculpture programs and painting programs. So
Hmm.
we would like sculpture students will get together with like painting students and we'll like share ideas. And I saw one of the sculpture students like stretching their own canvas instead of buying it from a store. And I thought, oh, I didn't know you could do that. And I immediately wanted to try it. So I like bought a bunch of lumber from the hardware store and tried my own with like nail guns. And I
Hmm.
thought that was just the best thing ever. And that kind of triggered me to learn more about making rather than
Mm.
painting on surface. So after graduating, I tried to put myself in an environment where I can learn more making, and I spent some time in the places where you do interior design. But then I realized that I was more interested in making object rather than creating space.
Mm-hmm.
So that's when I decided, and then I also loved the idea of being able to make a furniture, like something functional. So that's when I decided to seek out for a furniture design program, and then went to grad school.
That's fantastic. So there's I do think that trajectory, realizing that two dimensions wasn't for you, and the frame was a conduit, is also a nice little
I
parallel with Esherick's own narrative.
I wouldn't say two-dimensional work wasn't for
No,
me,
fair.
but but I guess like I discovered, because I didn't had an opportunity to work with three-dimensional material before going to college, and that's what my
Mhm.
entry to three-dimensional medium. And I realized that I'm I'm interested in this, so I kind of went for it.
Absolutely. I think just going for it is also another nice tie with Esherick. I think we're at the end of our conversation today, but Peter, I just want to thank you so much for sharing your time, your story, your work, and your plans for what is going to be a really, really exciting exhibition whenever we can touch things again.
Yeah,
So
thank you so
thank
much
you
for
so much
inviting
for,
me. Thank you so much for inviting me, and
well,
thank you so much for the conversation.
we're happy to have you as a part of the Esherick Museum family, and look forward
Oh,
to
it's a
chatting
pleasure.
with you more.
Yes, yes, yes.
Thanks, everyone.